The massive chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, its walls reflecting the light of 1,000 different suns. Representatives from hundreds of worlds floated, sat, or hummed suspended in their designated areas, each species more alien than the last. The monthly Galactic Council meeting was about to begin. Ambassador Crix of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his golden scales and checked his data tablet. Today's agenda looked boring as usual. Trade disputes between the Andorian merchants and the silicon-based Nexari. Territory arguments over some worthless asteroid fields. Resource allocation for the Outer Rim colonies. Nothing that would affect the major powers. The session began with the usual formalities. Secretary General Vorth, a massive creature that looked like a walking tree, called for order in his booming voice. The translator units hummed to life, converting thousands of different languages into understandable speech for each delegate. Then something happened that had never occurred in the Council's 3,000-year history. The air in the center of the chamber began to shimmer. A cold wind swept through the room despite the perfect climate controls. The lights dimmed without any technical malfunction. Every delegate fell silent as an ancient presence made itself known. The being that appeared defied easy description. It seemed to be made of starlight and shadow, constantly shifting between solid and ethereal. Its form suggested vast age and wisdom that stretched back to the early days of the galaxy. Most delegates had heard stories of such entities, but few had ever seen one. "I am the Watcher," the being spoke, its voice reaching every mind directly, without need for translation. "I have observed this galaxy since before your civilizations learned to make fire. I speak to you now, because I have seen something that demands attention." Ambassador Crix felt a chill run down his spine. The Watchers were legendary beings, older than star systems, who rarely interfered in galactic affairs. For one to appear before the Council meant something significant was happening. "There is a species on the 3rd planet of System Sol 3, on the outer edge of the Orion spiral arm," the Watcher continued. "They call themselves humans. They are young, barely having discovered atomic energy. Their world appears primitive by your standards. They fight among themselves constantly. They pollute their own environment. They seem weak and divided." Many delegates began to relax. This was just another primitive species discovery. The Department of Emerging Civilizations dealt with dozens of these every year. Standard protocol was to monitor from a distance and make contact only when they achieved faster-than-light travel. Ambassador Vex of the Nexari Collective, her crystalline form chiming as she moved, sent a thought message to the chamber. "Honored Watcher, we appreciate your concern for emerging species, but surely this does not require the full Council's attention." The Watcher's form darkened, and the temperature in the chamber dropped several degrees. "You do not understand. I have watched these humans for thousands of their years. I have seen them survive ice ages, volcanic winters, plagues that should have destroyed them completely. They do not merely endure hardship, they grow stronger from it. Every time their species faces extinction, they unite in ways that defy logic. They sacrifice everything for their offspring's survival. They create technologies in months that should take decades to develop. They fight with a desperation and creativity that transforms them into something far beyond their normal capabilities." The chamber remained silent, but Crix could feel the skepticism radiating from his fellow delegates. The Watcher was ancient and wise, but this sounded like the ramblings of someone who had spent too much time observing primitive worlds. "I have seen their wars," the Watcher said, its voice growing more intense. "When threatened with total destruction, humans become something else entirely. They do not fight just to win battles. They fight to ensure their enemies can never threaten them again. They will sacrifice entire cities to protect their children. They will turn their own bodies into weapons if necessary." Commander Zalf of the hegemony military forces, a being that looked like an armored insect, the size of a small vehicle, clicked his mandibles dismissively. Honored Watcher, every species fights desperately when cornered. This is basic evolutionary behavior. What makes these humans different from any other primitive warrior culture? The Watcher turned its attention directly to Zelf, and the military commander's confidence visibly wavered. What makes them different is their ability to think beyond the immediate threat. When humans face extinction, they do not just fight to survive that moment, they fight to create a future where such threats cannot exist. They will study their enemies completely. They will reverse engineer captured technology at impossible speeds. They will form alliances with anyone willing to stand against their oppressors. Most dangerously, they will remember every detail of how they were wronged, and they will ensure it never happens to anyone else. The ancient being paused, allowing its words to sink in. I tell you this because I have seen the patterns of fate. Someone in this galaxy will eventually threaten these humans. When that happens, the attacker will discover that humanity's greatest weapon is not their technology or their numbers. It is their ability to transform every defeat into education, every loss into motivation, and every enemy into a teacher. Ambassador Crix found himself leaning forward despite his skepticism. What exactly are you warning us about, Honored Watcher? I am warning you that when humanity retaliates, it will not be simple revenge. It will be a complete restructuring of galactic power. They will not stop at defeating their enemies. They will remake the entire political landscape to ensure such aggression becomes impossible. The Watcher began to fade, its message delivered. Mark my words, representatives of the galaxy. The humans appear weak now, but they are not sleeping. When someone finally pushes them too far, the galaxy will learn why some species are meant to inherit the stars. The ancient being vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and the echo of its warning. For several moments, the chamber remained completely silent. Then Ambassador Crix burst into laughter. Did we just receive a lecture about primitive humans from a cosmic entity older than our civilizations? They haven't even achieved interstellar flight. Soon the entire chamber was filled with various sounds of amusement. The silicon-based Nexari chimed like broken glass. The gaseous ethereals pulsed with colors that indicated humor. Even the normally serious tree-like Secretary General rustled his leaves in what passed for laughter among his species. With respect to the Honored Watcher, Ambassador Vex transmitted. Perhaps eons of solitary observation have made it somewhat dramatic in its assessments. Every species likes to believe they are special and dangerous. The discussion quickly moved to practical matters. Several delegates noted that Sol 3 was in an ideal location for future mining operations. The system contains several planets rich in rare minerals, and the primitive inhabitants would pose no significant obstacle to resource extraction. Commander Zalth updated his files with a note to monitor human military development, but classified the threat level as minimal. After all, these humans were still fighting with chemical explosives and metal projectiles. They couldn't even maintain peace on their own planet. The formal warning from the Watcher was logged in the official records, filed under ancient entity advisories, and promptly forgotten as the Council moved on to more pressing matters like trade route disputes and territorial negotiations. None of them noticed that their surveillance satellites around Earth had been detecting some unusual activities in remote human facilities. Strange energy readings, unexplained construction projects, coded communications mentioning something called contingency protocols. But those readings were classified as experimental research by a primitive species still learning to harness nuclear energy, nothing that could possibly threaten advanced galactic civilizations. The warning had been given. The galaxy had chosen to ignore it. Now the cosmic dice were rolling, and somewhere on a small blue planet, humanity continued its preparations for a future that the galaxy couldn't imagine. 3 months after the Watcher's warning, Ambassador Crix stood before a holographic display showing the Sol system. The image rotated slowly, highlighting the mineral-rich asteroids and the gas-giant planets perfect for fuel extraction. But his attention focused on the third planet, Earth. "The preliminary surveys are complete," reported Chief Mining Engineer Thaxon, his scaled hands dancing over the control interface. "The system contains enough rare minerals to power our expansion for the next 50 years. The deuterium reserves in the gas giants alone are worth more than our entire colonial budget." Admiral Voss, commander of the Zephyrian expansion fleet, projected tactical data alongside the system map. "Military assessment confirms minimal resistance capability. The inhabitants use primitive chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. Their largest warships are less than 2 kilometers long. Our standard patrol squadron could neutralize their entire military in less than 6 hours." Crix studied the data with satisfaction. The Zephyrian Empire needed new resources to maintain its position as the galaxy's second-largest power. The Nexari Collective was expanding rapidly, and the hegemony military forces controlled too many key systems. This Sol system represented exactly the kind of opportunity the Empire needed. "What about the inhabitants?" asked Mining Director Yaleth. "The preliminary scans show over 7 billion individuals concentrated on the third planet." "Standard relocation protocols," Crix replied without hesitation. "We'll establish reservation zones on their northern continents. The climate there is harsh enough to discourage expansion while providing adequate living space. Once we've extracted the valuable resources, they can have their planet back." Admiral Voss called up additional tactical displays. The humans appear to be fragmented into nearly 200 separate political entities. Their military forces are divided among these nations, with no unified command structure. They spend more energy fighting each other than developing space-based defenses. The presentation continued for another hour, covering extraction timelines, colonial infrastructure requirements, and profit projections. Everything looked perfect for a routine expansion operation. The type the Zephyrian Empire had conducted successfully dozens of times before. "Very well," Crix decided. "Admiral Voss, prepare the third expansion fleet. Standard diplomatic protocols. We'll give them 72 hours to accept relocation terms. If they refuse, we proceed with forced compliance." 3 weeks later, the Zephyrian Third Expansion Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. 50 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation, their weapons powered but not yet targeted. Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth grow larger on the main display. "Communications, broadcast the standard compliance message on all frequencies," he ordered. The message went out in dozens of Earth languages, translated by the fleet's advanced computer systems. "Inhabitants of Sol 3, you have been selected for incorporation into the Zephyrian Imperial Economic Zone. You have 72 hours to surrender all military assets and prepare for relocation to designated reservation areas. Compliance will ensure your continued survival and well-being. Resistance will result in the necessary use of force." On Earth, every government, every military installation, every space monitoring station received the message simultaneously. The reaction was immediate and unlike anything in human history. Within 6 hours, the President of the United States was in emergency conference with the Premier of Russia, the President of China, and leaders from every major nation. The European Union called an immediate emergency session. The United Nations Security Council went into continuous session. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Secretary General Martinez over the Global Emergency Network, "we face a threat unlike anything in human history. But we also face an opportunity to prove what our species is truly capable of when we stand together." What happened next would have shocked any galactic observer familiar with human history. Instead of fracturing into competing factions, Instead of each nation trying to negotiate separate deals, humanity did something unprecedented. They united completely. Within 24 hours, every nuclear weapon on Earth was under unified command. Every military satellite, every defense system, every research facility was suddenly working toward a single goal. The process wasn't smooth. There were arguments, disagreements, and frantic negotiations. But by the 48-hour mark, humanity had achieved something they'd never managed before: true global unity. Admiral Voss received regular reports from his intelligence units monitoring Earth communications. What they intercepted worried him more with each passing hour. "Sir, we're detecting massive data transfers between all major human military installations," reported his intelligence officer. "They appear to be sharing technological information at an unprecedented rate. They're activating something called Emergency Protocol 7, added the communications specialist. "We can't decode the specifics, but the traffic patterns suggest they're bringing online systems that weren't previously active." "What kind of systems?" Voss asked. "Unknown, sir, but the energy readings from several locations have increased by over 300%. Voss frowned. This wasn't how primitive species usually responded to first contact. Most either surrendered immediately or made desperate, uncoordinated attacks. These humans were doing neither. On Earth, facilities that had been disguised as research centers or industrial complexes were revealing their true purpose. Underground bunkers that didn't appear on any public maps were suddenly buzzing with activity. Projects that had been maintained in secret for decades were finally being activated. In a facility buried deep beneath the Swiss Alps, Dr. Sarah Chen stood before a massive chamber containing what looked like a small artificial star. "The fusion cascade system is ready," she reported into her secure communicator. 40 years of theoretical research, and we're finally going to test it under real conditions. In a similar installation hidden in the Australian outback, Colonel James Harrison watched as automated factories began producing devices that looked nothing like conventional weapons. "The gravitational resonance artillery is coming online," he confirmed. "The prototypes tested better than we hoped." At a secret base on the far side of the moon, Commander Lu Wei monitored the charging sequences of weapons that humanity had been developing in absolute secrecy since the 1960s. "The orbital defense grid will be ready in 18 hours, she reported. "Let's see how they handle directed energy at relativistic speeds." Admiral Voss received his final intelligence report as the 72-hour deadline approached. "Sir, we're detecting unusual technological signatures throughout the system. Energy readings that don't match our database of human capabilities. And sir, their orbital traffic has increased by over 500% in the last day." "Explanation?" Voss demanded. "Unknown. But whatever they're doing, it's far more sophisticated than our preliminary surveys indicated." When humanity's response came, it was delivered by every communication satellite, every radio station, and every network on Earth simultaneously. The message was simple and spoken by an elderly man who identified himself as Director of Global Defense Operations. "To the Zephyrian Empire, we have received your ultimatum. We reject your terms completely. We will not relocate, we will not surrender, we will not negotiate with species who threaten our extinction. You have gravely underestimated what humanity is capable of when we are pushed too far. You have 72 hours to leave our system. If you remain, we will consider it an act of war. You have been warned." Admiral Voss laughed as he heard the message. "These primitives think they can threaten us? Prepare the fleet for combat operations. This'll be over in hours." But as his ships moved closer to Earth, their sensors began detecting energy signatures that shouldn't exist. Gravitational anomalies that defied physics, orbital installations that appeared out of nowhere, and from the surface of Earth, from hidden facilities around the moon, and from asteroid bases that human ingenuity had concealed for decades, humanity prepared to show the galaxy what happened when someone threatened their home. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was very, very angry. Admiral Voss watched his tactical display with growing confusion as the Zephyrian fleet approached Earth. What should have been a simple military operation was turning into something he'd never encountered before. "Sir, I'm reading massive energy spikes from the planet's surface," reported his sensor officer. "Whatever they're charging up down there, it's drawing power from their entire electrical grid." "Primitives with their nuclear reactors," Voss dismissed. "Nothing that can threaten our ships. Begin the bombardment of their military installations." The first Zephyrian attack began exactly as planned. Energy beams lanced down from space, targeting what their intelligence had identified as Earth's major military bases. The Pentagon, the Kremlin, NORAD, and dozens of other facilities were hit with precision strikes designed to cripple human command and control. The attacks hit their targets perfectly, yet Earth's military response didn't collapse. Instead, it seemed to intensify. "Sir, we're detecting new installations coming online," the sensor officer said, his voice tense. "They weren't there 5 minutes ago." Voss studied his display. New energy signatures were appearing all over Earth's surface, in locations that their surveillance had shown as empty wilderness or farmland. "Explain this." I can't, sir. It's like they built an entire secondary military infrastructure underground, and only activated it when we attacked." What Admiral Voss didn't understand was that humanity had been preparing for this exact scenario for over 60 years. Ever since the first reports of UFO sightings, since the first hints that Earth might not be alone in the universe, military leaders had been asking a simple question: what if they're hostile? The answer was Project Deep Shield, the most classified operation in human history. While the world argued about politics and economics, military engineers had been building a secret defense network. Underground factories, hidden missile silos, orbital weapons platforms disguised as communication satellites, all waiting for the day when humanity would need to defend itself against an enemy from the stars. That day had arrived. The first human counterattack caught the Zephyrians completely off guard. What looked like a simple communication satellite suddenly unfolded like a deadly flower, revealing weapons that fired concentrated gravitational fields. The beam hit Admiral Voss's flagship and did something impossible. It began crushing the ship from the inside out. "Damage report," Voss shouted as his bridge shook violently. "Hull integrity compromised on 7 decks. Sir, whatever hit us is creating localized gravity fields inside the ship. The metal is being compressed like it's falling into a black hole." Before Voss could respond, more attacks came from directions that made no sense. The moon, which their scans had shown as a dead rock with some primitive mining equipment, suddenly bristled with weapons. Energy beams, missile swarms, and something that looked like concentrated lightning struck the Zephyrian formation. "Sir, we're also reading multiple launches from the planet's surface," reported the tactical officer. "But these aren't missiles. They're shits?" Voss watched in amazement as what appeared to be crude human spacecraft rose from Earth's atmosphere. But as they got closer, he realized they weren't ships at all. They were weapons. Massive kinetic missiles using entire decommissioned space shuttles as delivery systems, packed with nuclear warheads, and aimed directly at his fleet. "Point defense! Shoot them down!" he ordered. The Zephyrian ships opened fire with their standard energy weapons, easily destroying the incoming projectiles. But when the weapons exploded, they didn't produce normal nuclear explosions. Instead, they released clouds of something that began eating through the Zephyrian ships' hulls like acid. "What is this?" Voss demanded. His science officer's voice was shaking. "Sir, it appears to be some kind of self-replicating nanite technology. The humans have weaponized molecular disassembly. Our hulls are being broken down at the atomic level." The battle continued for 6 hours, and with each passing minute, Admiral Voss realized he was fighting an enemy unlike any the Zephyrian Empire had ever faced. These humans didn't fight like civilized species. They didn't follow standard military doctrine. They fought like cornered animals, with the intelligence of advanced engineers. When the humans realized their kinetic weapons were effective, they began using their own space stations as missiles. The International Space Station, loaded with experimental explosives, rammed into a Zephyrian destroyer, and detonated with enough force to crack the planet killer in half. When the Zephyrians adapted their shields to deflect physical attacks, the humans switched to psychological warfare. They began broadcasting signals that somehow interfaced with Zephyrian brain chemistry. Sounds, images, and frequencies that triggered panic responses in the reptilian nervous system. Several Zephyrian crews abandoned their posts as primal terror overwhelmed their training. "Sir, we're losing ships to crew breakdown," reported the fleet psychologist. "Whatever the humans are broadcasting, it's triggering evolutionary fear responses. Our people are experiencing panic attacks that make them unable to function." But the worst part wasn't the weapons or the psychological attacks. It was how quickly the humans learned and adapted. Every time the Zephyrians changed tactics, the humans changed faster. Every time they thought they'd found a weakness in human defenses, new weapons appeared that specifically countered their strategy. "Sir, we need to withdraw and reassess," advised Commander Thex, Voss's second-in-command. "We've lost 12 ships, and the humans are bringing more weapons online every hour. This isn't a primitive species. This is something else entirely." Admiral Voss wanted to argue, but the tactical display told the story clearly. His overwhelming technological advantage was disappearing. Worse, his intelligence officers were reporting that the humans had somehow captured 3 disabled Zephyrian vessels and were already beginning to reverse engineer the technology. "How is that possible?" Voss asked. "Our computer systems have quantum encryption. Our hull materials are classified military secrets. They shouldn't be able to understand our technology for decades." "Sir, we're monitoring their communications," the intelligence officer replied. "They appear to have mobilized their entire scientific community. Universities, corporations, government laboratories, they're all working together to analyze our technology. And sir, they're making progress faster than our own engineers thought possible." The final blow came when human ships appeared behind the Zephyrian fleet. Not from Earth, but from the asteroid belt. Somehow, in just 72 hours, humans had managed to mobilize hidden installations throughout their own solar system. "Sir, we're surrounded," the tactical officer reported. "The humans have weapons platforms we never detected. They're everywhere." Admiral Voss looked at his displays showing 18 destroyed ships, dozens of damaged vessels, and human forces that seemed to grow stronger with every passing hour. He thought about the Watcher's warning, dismissed so casually by the Galactic Council. "Fleet retreat," he ordered. "Emergency jump to hyperspace. Now." As the remaining Zephyrian ships fled the Sol system, they left behind something unprecedented in galactic history. A primitive species had not only survived first contact with a major galactic power, they had driven them away. But more importantly, the humans now possessed advanced alien technology, detailed scans of enemy capabilities, and the complete technical specifications of faster-than-light travel. On Earth, President Williams stood in the newly revealed Global Defense Command Center, watching the alien fleet disappear into hyperspace. Around him, scientists and engineers were already at work, analyzing the captured technology. "Dr. Chen, how long before we can build our own interstellar ships?" he asked. The physicist looked up from her analysis of a captured Zephyrian engine core. "Mr. President, based on what we've learned in the last 6 hours, I estimate we'll have our first prototype hyperspace drive operational within 6 months. And our first fleet? Give us 2 years, sir. 2 years. And humanity will be ready to take this fight to whoever sent these invaders." The president nodded grimly. "Then let's get to work. The galaxy just learned that humanity doesn't forgive easily. Now they're going to learn that we never forget. In the depths of space, Admiral Voss transmitted his report to the Zephyrian High Command. But he knew his words could never truly convey what he had witnessed. Humanity wasn't just a primitive species that had gotten lucky. They were something far more dangerous. They were a species that turned every attack into a learning experience, every defeat into motivation, and every enemy into a teacher. 6 months after the failed Zephyrian invasion, Ambassador Crick stood before the Imperial High Council, trying to explain what should have been impossible. The holographic display behind him showed star maps that told a story of systematic defeat across 12 different systems. The humans struck simultaneously at all major Zephyrian installations in the Outer Rim territories. Crix reported, his voice barely controlled. They didn't just attack randomly. They studied our supply lines, our communication networks, our political structure. Every target they chose was designed to cause maximum disruption with minimal civilian casualties. Emperor Valdash, his massive form coiled on the imperial throne, studied the tactical reports with growing disbelief. You're telling me that a species we classified as primitive 6 months ago has somehow acquired faster-than-light travel, built an interstellar fleet, and defeated our colonial forces across a dozen worlds? Yes, Your Imperial Majesty, but it's worse than that. They didn't just defeat us. They liberated every oppressed species in those systems and offered them alliance terms. The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed dangerously. Explain. Crix activated detailed recordings from the attack systems. Watch this transmission from the Kepler 442 system. The humans didn't announce themselves as conquerors. They announced themselves as liberators. The recording showed a human woman in a crisp military uniform standing on the bridge of a ship that looked like no design in any galactic database. Behind her, displays showed the systematic destruction of Zephyrian military installations while carefully avoiding civilian infrastructure. People of Kepler 442, the human commander said, I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Consortium. We have come to remove the Zephyrian occupation forces from your system. We offer you freedom, advanced technology, and alliance with humanity. We ask for nothing in return except your promise to never oppress other species the way you have been oppressed. Crix paused the recording. Your Majesty, within hours of that broadcast, the native Keplerian resistance was fighting alongside human forces. The humans provided them with weapons that were more advanced than our own standard equipment. Where did they get such technology? Demanded General Thorax, commander of the Imperial military forces. They reverse-engineered our own systems and improved them. But more than that, they seem to have developed completely new technologies based on principles our scientists don't understand. Gravitational weapons, quantum disruptors, something they call probability bombs that somehow make our defensive systems malfunction. Emperor Valdash rose from his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. How many systems have we lost? 17, Your Majesty. But the humans aren't keeping them. They're establishing independent governments under something they call the Liberation Alliance. Each system gets defensive weapons, medical technology, and advanced infrastructure, but they govern themselves. They're building an empire without calling it an empire, observed Chancellor Yest, the empire's chief political advisor. They're creating voluntary allies instead of conquered subjects. Intelligence reports suggest that former Zephyrian colonies are actually requesting human protection. Species that we ruled for decades are now sending ambassadors to Earth, asking to join this Liberation Alliance. The holographic display shifted to show intercepted communications between Earth and various alien species. Emperor Valdash read the translations with growing fury. The humans weren't just offering military protection. They were sharing technology that most galactic civilizations kept strictly classified. They're giving away medical advances that could extend lifespans by centuries, he read aloud. Agricultural techniques that could end famine. Educational systems that accelerate intellectual development. They're trying to uplift every species they encounter. Yes, Your Majesty, Crix confirmed. We estimate that over 300 different species have either joined their alliance or are negotiating to do so. What truly worried the Zephyrian leadership wasn't just the military defeats. It was how quickly humanity was reshaping galactic politics. Instead of conquering systems and ruling them directly, humans were creating a network of grateful allies who chose to follow Earth's lead. General Thorax studied the tactical reports with professional interest. Their military strategy is unlike anything in our databases. They don't just defeat enemy forces, they ensure those forces can never threaten anyone again. But they also make sure that former enemy subjects become their new allies. Show them the Rigel system reports, Crix said quietly. New recordings appeared, showing the aftermath of humanity's attack on the Rigel mining colonies. Instead of the destroyed infrastructure and enslaved populations that typically resulted from galactic warfare, the displays showed something unprecedented. Former slaves operating advanced mining equipment as free workers, with human advisors teaching them how to maximize efficiency while maintaining environmental protection. They're not just liberating oppressed peoples, Chancellor Yest observed. They're making them more productive and prosperous than they ever were under our rule. The Rigel system is now producing twice as many rare minerals as it did when we controlled it. But the workers are free, and the environment is being restored. Emperor Valdash turned his attention back to the star maps. What is their next target? Crix highlighted several systems in red. Intelligence suggests they're planning to move against the Vega system complex next. If they take those systems, they'll control the primary trade routes between the core worlds and the outer rim. We'll lose access to 60% of our resource imports. Military assessment? General Thorax's report was grim. Our remaining colonial forces are no match for human technology. But more importantly, many of our subject species are already in communication with human representatives. We're facing the possibility of system-wide rebellions, supported by advanced human weapons. And the other major powers? The Nexari Collective? The Hegemony? They're staying neutral, Crix reported. Some are even beginning to establish diplomatic relations with this Terran defense consortium. The humans appear to be offering trade agreements and technology exchanges to anyone willing to sign non-aggression pacts. Emperor Valdash was silent for several minutes, studying the strategic implications. The Zephyrian Empire had built its power through military conquest and economic exploitation. But humanity was offering a completely different model. Voluntary cooperation, shared prosperity, and mutual defense. What do our intelligence analysts project for the future? Your Majesty, if current trends continue, the Zephyrian Empire will lose all Outer Rim territories within 18 months. The Liberation Alliance will control approximately 30% of the galaxy's habitable systems. And sir, they'll have the voluntary loyalty of over 1 billion sentient beings. While we will have what? The core worlds that depend on us for protection, and the few remaining colonies too distant for human forces to reach quickly. Emperor Valdash realized that humanity had accomplished in 6 months what the greatest galactic empires had failed to achieve in millennia. They had created a political structure where species wanted to be members instead of being forced into submission. Your Majesty, General Thorax said carefully, we need to consider that we may not be able to defeat this Terran defense consortium militarily. But more importantly, we need to consider whether we want to. Explain. The humans have sent diplomatic communications to all major galactic powers. They're offering to negotiate, not surrender terms or tribute demands, genuine negotiations for peaceful coexistence. They want to establish what they call a Galactic Cooperation Treaty. Chancellor Yest pulled up the human diplomatic proposals. They're suggesting a galaxy-wide agreement banning slavery, preventing the exploitation of developing species, requiring mutual aid during natural disasters, and establishing trade protocols that benefit all participants. In other words, Emperor Valdash said slowly, they want to create a galaxy where species like ours can't build empires through conquest and oppression. Yes, Your Majesty, but they're also offering us membership in their system, advanced technology, expanded trade opportunities, and mutual defense agreements. We would remain independent, but agree to their ethical guidelines. Emperor Valdash looked at the star maps one more time. The red zones showing human influence were expanding faster than any previous galactic power in recorded history. But unlike previous empires, this expansion was creating prosperity instead of exploitation. Schedule a meeting with the human ambassador. If we can't defeat them, and if their system actually works better than ours, perhaps it's time to learn from them. As the Imperial Council prepared to negotiate with humanity, similar conversations were taking place in capital cities across the galaxy. The humans hadn't just defeated one empire, they had created a new model for galactic civilization. And species everywhere were choosing to be part of it. 1 year after the first Zephyrian ship appeared at Earth, Ambassador Elena Rodriguez stood in the newly constructed Unity Station orbiting Earth. Through the massive viewing windows, she could see ships from dozens of different species arriving and departing on peaceful missions. The sights still amazed her. Ambassador Rodriguez, the Galactic Council is ready to convene, announced her aide, a young man whose grandfather had fought in the original defense of Earth. Elena adjusted her formal diplomatic uniform and walked toward the main assembly hall. Today would mark the official ratification of the Galactic Cooperation Charter, the document that would reshape interstellar civilization forever. The assembly hall was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Human architects had worked with Zephyrian crystalsmiths, Nexari computational experts, and dozens of other species to create a space where every form of life could participate comfortably. The result was a chamber that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, adapting to each species' environmental and social needs. As Elena took her position at the podium representing the Terran Defense Consortium, she reflected on how much had changed. The aggressive empire that had once threatened to relocate humanity was now the Zephyrian Republic, a founding member of the new Galactic Alliance. Former Emperor Valdash, now President Valdash, had become one of humanity's strongest supporters. Fellow beings of the galaxy, Elena began, her words automatically translated into thousands of languages and communication methods. 1 year ago, we faced extinction. Today, we celebrate the birth of a new era of cooperation and prosperity. In the audience, representatives from over 400 different species listened attentively. The Liberation Alliance had grown far beyond anyone's expectations. What had started as a desperate defense of Earth had become a voluntary federation encompassing nearly half the galaxy's inhabited systems. The Galactic Cooperation Charter represents more than just a political agreement, Elena continued. It represents a fundamental change in how we approach civilization itself. We have proven that species can work together without conquest, prosper together without exploitation, and grow together without fear. The Charter itself was a remarkable document. Instead of the complex territorial agreements and tribute systems that had characterized previous galactic politics, it was built around simple principles: voluntary membership, mutual aid, shared prosperity, and absolute prohibition of slavery or oppression. Any species could join by agreeing to these basic rules. Any species could leave at any time, keeping all the technology and benefits they had gained. But in practice, no one wanted to leave. The cooperative system was simply too successful. Secretary General Martinez, now representing Earth in the reformed Galactic Council, read the key provisions aloud. Article 1. All sentient species have the right to self-determination and freedom from oppression. Article 2. Technology and knowledge shall be shared freely among member species to benefit all. Article 3. No member shall use force against another except in self-defense or defense of other members. The voting began, and Elena watched with pride as species after species registered their approval. The Zephyrian Republic voted yes. The Nexari Collective voted yes. Even the traditionally isolated hegemony military forces, impressed by the alliance's effectiveness, voted to join. But not everyone was ready to embrace the new order. Ambassador Krex of the Draconian Imperium stood to address the assembly. The Draconian Imperium recognizes the achievements of this alliance, but we cannot accept limitations on our traditional governance methods. We hereby decline membership and request recognition as a neutral power. Your decision is respected, Elena replied diplomatically. The Charter provides for neutral zones and non-aggression agreements. You are welcome to change your position at any time. What she didn't say, but everyone understood, was that species choosing to remain outside the alliance were also choosing to remain isolated. The economic and technological benefits of membership were so significant that isolation meant stagnation. As the formal voting concluded with overwhelming approval, Elena felt a familiar chill in the air. The lights dimmed slightly, and a presence that she had only heard described made itself known. The Watcher materialized in the center of the assembly hall, its form as enigmatic as ever. But this time, instead of warning, Elena sensed satisfaction radiating from the ancient being. Representatives of the galaxy, the Watcher spoke, its voice reaching every mind present. I return to witness what has become of my warning. The entire assembly fell silent. Many of the delegates had heard of the Watcher's appearance a year ago, but few had witnessed it personally. A year ago, I warned you that humanity's retaliation would reshape galactic civilization. I told you they would not simply seek revenge, but would restructure the entire political landscape to prevent future aggression. The Watcher's form shifted, seeming to examine each delegate individually. I have watched this galaxy for eons. I have seen countless empires rise and fall, species bloom and fade, civilizations create wonders and commit horrors. But I have never seen anything like what has happened in this past year. Humanity was attacked by a superior force, and not only survived, but emerged stronger. But more remarkably, they used their victory not to create another empire of conquest, but to build something entirely new, a voluntary association based on mutual benefit and shared values. Ambassador Valdash of the former Zephyrian Empire stood to address the ancient being. Honored Watcher, we have learned that our traditional methods of expansion and control were not only morally wrong, but economically inefficient. The humans showed us that cooperation produces better results than conquest. Indeed, the Watcher replied, and now your former empire is more prosperous, more secure, and more respected than it ever was when it ruled through force. Elena stepped forward. Honored Watcher, humanity never sought to rule the galaxy. We only wanted to ensure that what happened to us could never happen to anyone else. And in doing so, the Watcher said, you have created the most stable and prosperous political structure this galaxy has ever known. Species are voluntarily joining your alliance because they see the benefits. Trade flourishes because exploitation has been eliminated. Scientific advancement accelerates because knowledge is shared freely. The ancient being paused, and Elena sensed something like approval in its presence. But your greatest achievement is not political or economic, it is moral. You have proven that strength does not require cruelty, that security does not require oppression, that prosperity does not require exploitation. The galaxy now faces a choice, the Watcher continued. Join this new order and benefit from unprecedented cooperation and growth, or remain isolated in old patterns of conflict and stagnation. Most are choosing wisely. Commander Sarah Chen, now Admiral of the Terran Deep Space Fleet, stood to address the assembly. We have one more announcement to make. Human exploration fleets have made contact with civilizations beyond this galaxy. We have discovered that our local galaxy group is part of a much larger cosmic community. The holographic displays activated, showing star maps that stretched beyond anything previously imagined. Millions of galaxies, each containing billions of species. We have been invited to represent our galaxy in an intergalactic cooperative council, Admiral Chen continued. But we don't go as conquerors or as a single species. We go as representatives of every species that chooses to be part of our alliance. The implications were staggering. Humanity had gone from a primitive species threatened with extinction to the leaders of galactic civilization. And now they were preparing to represent the entire galaxy among the stars. The Watcher's form began to fade, but its final words carried clearly through the chamber. When I first warned you about humanity, I said they would remake the galaxy to ensure oppression became impossible. I was correct, but I underestimated the scope of their vision. They didn't just remake galactic civilization, they created a template for intergalactic cooperation. What begins here will spread to every galaxy in the cosmic web. The age of conquest is ending throughout the universe, and the age of cooperation is beginning. Remember this day, representatives of the galaxy. Remember that when one species threatened humanity with extinction, humanity responded by lifting the entire galaxy to new heights of civilization. As the Watcher vanished completely, Elena looked out at the assembly of species that had once been enemies, subjects, or strangers, now united in common purpose. Earth's blue globe hung in the viewing port behind her, no longer a vulnerable world hiding from galactic powers, but the symbolic capital of the largest voluntary association in cosmic history. The charter is ratified, she announced. Welcome to the new galaxy. Outside Unity Station, ships from hundreds of worlds began their journeys home, carrying news of the new order to every corner of galactic civilization. And from Earth, the first intergalactic exploration vessels prepared for voyages that would carry humanity's message of cooperation beyond the stars themselves. The galaxy had ignored the ancient warning. Now they were living in the reality the Watcher had foreseen. A reality where humanity's response to aggression had transformed not just their own fate, but the destiny of countless civilizations among the stars.